The day Sarah found out was the day her world tilted on its axis, a silent rupture that shattered years of trust in a single brutal moment. It began innocuously enough with a call from the bank, an alert about an overdraft she hadn't anticipated, leading her to dig deeper into the accounts she had always assumed were secure. The college fund, the one she and Michael had painstakingly built since their children were born. The fund meant to give Emma and Jake a future brighter than their own. Free of debt and worry, a promise of hope and stability. But as she sifted through the statements, her heart sank with every transaction marked not by tuition payments or savings growth but by hotel bills, extravagant dinners, and strange names she had never heard, names that whispered betrayal and deceit. The numbers didn't lie, and neither did the evidence of a life lived double, a husband who, behind closed doors and beneath the veneer of fatherly devotion, had quietly siphoned away their children's future to sustain an affair with a woman from his office. A woman whose laughter echoed in his texts and whose presence filled the shadows of his absences. A secret that wrapped around Sarah like a suffocating fog, blurring the lines between disbelief and anger, sorrow and rage. She remembered their vows, the promises exchanged under soft lights and hopeful eyes, the commitment to build a family and a life together. And now those promises lay shattered. Amidst a trail of lies, the trust they had woven like a delicate fabric torn apart by selfish desire and betrayal. She confronted Michael that evening, her voice trembling with a mixture of hurt and fury, the confrontation a tempest of accusations, denials and reluctant confessions, his eyes avoiding hers as the weight of guilt pressed down on him, the man she had loved and trusted now exposed as a stranger who had gambled their children's future on a reckless pursuit of forbidden passion. As the days unfolded, the house felt colder, the silence between them louder than any argument, and Sarah found herself wrestling with a tumult of emotions. Heartbreak that threatened to swallow her whole, a fierce determination to protect Emma and Jake from the fallout, and a creeping sense of betrayal so deep it challenged her very identity as a wife and mother. She reached out for support, confiding in close friends and late-night conversations with her own mother, piecing together a plan. To rebuild, to salvage what could be saved from the wreckage, to shield her children from the harsh reality that their dreams of college might need to be rewritten, scaled back, or deferred indefinitely. Meanwhile, Michael sank into a quiet remorse, grappling with the consequences of his actions, the affair dissolving under the strain of guilt and exposure. And yet the damage was done, irreversible and raw, a fracture in their family that would demand years of healing and hard truths. Sarah's nights became restless, haunted by visions of what might have been and the uncertainty of what would come. But amid the pain, a fierce resilience took root, a vow to rise from the ashes stronger, to fight for her children's future even if it meant walking the difficult path alone. A path forged through betrayal but powered by an unyielding love that no diversion, no matter how cruel, could extinguish. She didn't cry in front of the children, though every cell in her body ached to collapse, to scream, to demand answers from the universe. But Sarah knew that what Jake and Emma needed now wasn't another crack in their foundation. It was steadiness, calm strength, the kind of quiet endurance only a mother could summon when the world turns against her. So she smiled through the mornings, packed their lunches, helped with homework, and tucked them in at night with stories they were beginning to outgrow, all the while nursing the sharp, invisible wound lodged deep in her chest. A wound carved by a man who had once whispered forever into her ear and then, without hesitation, poured their children's dreams into the hands of another woman. Someone younger perhaps, or hungrier, or simply more convenient in the haze of office flirtations and unspoken dissatisfaction. And yet, Sarah didn't allow herself the luxury of wallowing, because wallowing wouldn't pay tuition, wallowing wouldn't explain to her daughter why the Stanford tour they had planned might now be replaced with community college brochures. Wallowing wouldn't undo the bookings at luxury hotels where Michael had paid with the same card they had used to open the college savings account 15 years ago. She began taking stock of their finances, creating spreadsheets late into the night, balancing debt against assets, applying for aid, researching scholarships, and chasing every possible lead that might help close the chasm left by his betrayal, driven not by revenge but by necessity, by a mother's primal need to protect, to rebuild, to prove that no man, not even the one who fathered her children, could destroy what she had dedicated her life to creating. And as she worked, she also withdrew emotionally and spiritually from the man who now existed in their house like a ghost, a silent presence haunted by shame, occasionally muttering apologies that felt as hollow as the promises he had broken, trying weekly to make amends as if flowers or groceries or offering to fix the garage door could rewrite the history of what he'd done. But Sarah wasn't looking for amends, not now. Not yet, maybe not ever, because something inside her had hardened. Not in bitterness, but in resolve, in clarity, the kind that only comes when you've been gutted and have no choice but to stitch yourself back together. She began to speak less and listen more, noticing the small details she had overlooked for years. How Michael always checked his phone at dinner, how he disappeared during family outings for work calls, how he had stopped asking about her dreams, her career, her thoughts, and the more she saw, the more she realized the affair wasn't a singular betrayal, it was the final symptom of a long, slow erosion, a quiet abandonment that had taken root years before the bank call, years before the texts and the receipts and the lipstick-smudged shirt that she'd once dismissed as an accident. The woman from work, her name was Melissa, she found out, was just the final act in a play that had begun long before Sarah even knew there was a script. And now, standing on the wreckage of their marriage, she had a choice: to fight for a man who had already left her in every way that mattered, or to fight for herself, for the woman she had set aside in the name of motherhood and sacrifice, for the version of Sarah who once had ambitions that stretched beyond PTA meetings and meal plans, for the mother who could show her children that survival is not about forgiveness but about reclamation, reclaiming dignity, purpose, strength. So she met with a lawyer, quietly, discreetly, going over every option from legal separation to divorce to how best to protect the remnants of their assets. And when Michael finally sensed what was happening, his remorse turned to panic, promises tumbling from his lips in desperate waves, that he would make it right, that he'd sell his car, cash out his 401k, anything to repair the damage. But Sarah no longer measured love in offers and money, she measured it in action, in truth, in accountability, and what he had offered was none of those things when it truly mattered. Still, part of her hurt to see him like that, broken and humbled, not because she missed the man he had become, but because she mourned the man she thought she had married, the man she had built a life with, the man who used to cradle their newborn daughter with tears in his eyes and whisper promises into the soft curve of her head, the man who once carried Jake on his shoulders through Disneyland and made pancakes on Saturday mornings in his boxers, laughing as flour dusted his hair like snow. Where had that man gone, and when and why hadn't she noticed until it was too late? These were the questions that kept her awake at night, not out of longing but out of grief, because betrayal isn't just about sex or secrets, it's about the theft of history, of shared memories turned into lies by the knowledge that one person was already gone while the other was still holding on. And as the weeks turned into months, Sarah found herself growing stronger, not through healing but through sheer necessity. As if pain were a forge and every hard decision a hammer, reshaping her into someone new. Someone not untouched by betrayal but empowered by it, someone who could look her children in the eye and say, "We're going to be okay," and mean it even if she didn't know exactly how yet, even if part of her still bled behind her steady voice and brave smile. And when the divorce papers were finally served, she didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because she had already done all her mourning in silence, in spreadsheets and sleepless nights, in whispered prayers and quiet mornings where she held her children a little longer, a little tighter than before. And so, with the divorce set in motion, Sarah stood alone in the kitchen one early Saturday morning, the pale winter light filtering through the blinds, casting long, tired shadows across the countertop where bills were stacked, where college brochures lay creased at the corners from too many sleepless nights spent rereading financial aid deadlines and institutional promises of merit-based scholarships, her coffee grown cold beside her untouched toast, and she realized in that quiet moment that she was no longer afraid, not of the future, not of loneliness, not even of starting over at 39 with 2 children and a career she had set aside for over a decade to support Michael's rise at the firm, to be the glue of the family, the steady one, the dependable one, the woman who bore the weight of everything with a smile. And though she wasn't ready to call herself strong just yet, there was something unshakable settling in her bones, something forged in fire, and as the weeks rolled by, she began to rebuild in small, deliberate ways, going back to her old network of colleagues, polishing her resume, taking evening classes in digital marketing, a field she had once touched with curiosity before life took over, and slowly, quietly she started earning again, not much at first, but enough to give her a sense of agency, a pulse of independence, and it felt good, like taking the first breath after being underwater too long. Emma noticed it first, how her mom seemed more awake lately, more present, less faded around the edges, and Jake, still too young to understand the complexities of betrayal, simply loved having her home more, watching movies together, feeling the safe cocoon of her attention without the sharpness that had filled the house in the months before everything broke, before the shouting, the tears behind closed doors, the silence at dinner. Michael, meanwhile, had moved into a small condo across town, and though he tried to maintain the semblance of a co-parenting routine, Sarah could see the guilt weighing on him, dragging at his every effort, turning his attempts to reconnect with the kids into clumsy gestures. Too expensive, too late, too performative. And while he never brought Melissa around again, Sarah sometimes wondered if he still saw her, or if the collapse of his family had sobered him into realizing what he'd truly lost, not just in terms of people but in purpose, in identity, in the quiet, unquestioning loyalty of a woman who had loved him for over a decade without asking for more than respect and honesty. But it no longer mattered, not really, because Sarah had stepped out of that story now. She had closed the chapter where she played the dutiful wife, the forgiving partner, the keeper of peace at all costs, and had started a new one. One where she made decisions for herself, one where she no longer second-guessed her instincts or stayed silent to avoid conflict, one where she began to understand that love, real love, doesn't require self-erasure. She met other single mothers through a local support group, women with their own stories of betrayal and rebirth, and in their shared grief they found laughter, resilience, and even moments of joy that reminded Sarah what it felt like to be seen, not as someone's wife or someone's mother, but as herself, Sarah Thompson, curious, thoughtful, with a dry wit and a mind sharper than she'd allowed herself to believe in years. Sometimes, late at night, after the kids were asleep and the house had gone quiet, she would sit on the back porch, with a blanket and a glass of wine, looking up at the sky and letting the cool air wash over her, and she'd wonder what her life might have looked like if Michael had never cheated, if the money had stayed untouched in the college fund, if they had grown old together like she once imagined. But those thoughts passed quickly now like clouds and didn't linger the way they used to because she no longer believed in what-ifs, only in what now. And the what now was this. Emma had won a local essay scholarship, Jake was thriving in his art classes, the new job was stable and growing, and Sarah was starting to feel not just okay but hopeful. A dangerous, beautiful thing to feel after devastation, the kind of hope that sprouts not in spring but in winter, quietly, stubbornly beneath frozen ground. She hadn't forgiven Michael, not in the way he wanted, not with absolution or reconciliation, but she had forgiven herself for not seeing it sooner, for staying too long, for believing that love meant endurance no matter the cost. And that forgiveness was the most noble response to betrayal. She had learned, painfully and completely, that sometimes the most powerful form of forgiveness is letting go entirely and walking away, not because you're angry but because you finally know your worth.